The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent those of any organization, including One Generation Away.
The freedom of a people to choose its leaders is the root of liberty.
Keep alive this experiment in liberty.
Liberty, in case you've forgotten, is the soul's right to breathe.
Government should be very minimal in protecting liberty.
Peace cannot be purchased at the cost of liberty.
The sturdy ground of liberty.
Liberty once lost is lost forever.
Fight for their liberty and for our security.
Guarantees individual liberty.
This great republic, born alone in liberty.
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 Liberty. Liberty.
Just how much do you want liberty?
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner,
a production of LibertyNation.com.
Cutting through the double talk, taking on the topics, going after what the politicians really mean, and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
How bad is media bias? How good is the economy? Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. Today we explore the depths of left-wing media bias with the nation's foremost media watchdog, Brent Bozell, founder and president of the Media Research Center, and the heights of the Trump economy with LibertyNation.com economics correspondent Andrew Moran. Plus, Talkin' Liberty with Liberty Nation's resident constitutional lawyer, Scott Cosenza.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
But we kick things off with our signature segment, Say What, as we go around the horn with some of the most wacky, astonishing, damnable, and ultimately revealing things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. So the U.S. women's soccer team wins the World Cup and uses the opportunity to step on the flag, launch a political agenda that might turn Captain Megan Rapinoe into the next America-hating Colin Kaepernick, and denounce President Trump. Rapinoe dropped the F-bomb about visiting the White House and then went on CNN and said she is, what else? A victim of Trump's America.
I'm not going to the White House. No, I'm not going to the White House. I don't think anyone on the team has any interest in lending the platform that we've worked so hard to build and the things that we fight for and the way that we live our life. I don't think that we want that to be co-opted or corrupted by this administration.
What is your message to the president?
I would say that your message is excluding people. You're excluding me. You're excluding people that look like me. You're excluding people of color.
So there is living proof that we can never get away from politics as long as the left ties everything they don't like to the evil Donald Trump, even as they should be radiating joy like they likely never will again. The word of the day on Capitol Hill this week is catfight. The cadre of radical leftists led by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, never much taken with Nancy Pelosi to begin with, took their public condemnation of the House Speaker to a new level this week, saying Pelosi trying to quiet the self-immolating ramblings of AOC and her cohorts with a presidential election on the horizon amounts to racism. Pelosi, in an interview, said contemptuously that AOC and her group is stuck in a Twitter world and have few supporters, and AOC fired back that her group is being singled out because they are women of color, an explosive charge within the party of diversity and inclusion. And AOC later tweeted that moderate Democrats were the equivalent of segregationist senators in the 1940s. Then AOC was asked to explain, and Pelosi was not amused.
It's singling out 4 individuals. And knowing the media environment that we're operating in, knowing the amount of death threats that we get, knowing the amount of concentration of attention, I think it's just worth asking why.
At the request of my members, an offensive tweet that came out of one of the members' offices that referenced our blue dogs and our new Dems essentially as segregationist. Our members took offense at that. I addressed that. How they're interpreting and carrying it to another place is up to them. But I'm not going to be discussing it any further.
So this Democratic Party, already in the grips of a presidential campaign dominated by leftist ideas that will never fly in a presidential election, are now at war with each other. And let me tell you, neither side is likely to back down. Pelosi won't, and AOC and her cohorts all represent safe, almost one-party districts and care a lot more about stoking revolution than loyalty to the Democratic Party leadership. But Pelosi didn't stop at taking on AOC and company. She also put the worst possible face on President Trump's attempt to do something that's been done for most all of American history: put a citizenship question in next year's census.
This is about keeping, make America, this hat, make America white again. They want to make sure that certain people are counted.
Right. And those people are called citizens. Trump finally decided on an executive order to use existing citizenship data from multiple agencies because the left's challenges to putting the question on the census form would have tied things up in court for who knows how long and prevented the completion of the census forms in time for the process to begin. Meanwhile, Joe Biden remains atop the presidential primary race for the Democrats, despite repeated gaffes and a feckless performance in the first round of debates. And this week, he said something else likely to cause trouble for him down the line, this time in stating his foreign policy goals.
Extend our presence around the globe, magnify our impact, while sharing the burden of leadership with our partners that respect no borders and cannot be contained by any walls.
So the former vice president says he respects no borders, so he's now on record for open borders after he said he wants a greater American presence around the globe, meaning more troops. Is he even paying attention to the political landscape? And, the presidency is not the only thing at stake in 2020. There's also those more than 500 seats that are up in the House and Senate and control of the upper and lower chambers, which is now divided. And the early focus on the Senate side is Mitch McConnell. His race is a preview of the down and dirty yet to come between conservatives and progressives as the Senate Majority Leader seeks the 7th term and is being challenged by a new darling on the left, Amy McGrath, who released an ad taking dead aim at McConnell as largely responsible for the mess in Washington.
Everything that's wrong in Washington had to start someplace. Well, it started with this man who was elected a lifetime ago, and who has, bit by bit, year by year, turned Washington into something we all despise, where dysfunction and chaos are political weapons, a place where ideals go to die.
So Amy McGrath says, predictably, that old Mitch is the ultimate swamp creature, while McConnell's counter ad uses McGrath's own utterances to predictably tag her as just another liberal.
I am further left. I am more progressive than anybody has been.
And I think the wall is stupid. I mean, I really do. It's a waste of money.
This is what we need in this country. They're here. They're not going anywhere. Let's bring them in.
Yes, I would support a move towards universal health care.
For the Congress to be a voice for progressive values.
Then, of course, the results of the election. And that morning I woke up, the only feeling I can describe that's any close to it was the feeling I had after 9/11.
These, my friends, are the type of ads which will start bombarding our psyches in the months ahead. We close with the lament of one Michelle Obama. The former First Lady did an interview with the fawning, starstruck Gayle King of CBS this week, and despite the praise lavished on her from the time she and her husband entered the White House, she portrayed herself as, of course, a victim.
Now I'm Michelle Obama and beloved, but for a minute there, I was an angry black woman who was emasculating her husband, who was somebody to be feared, because that was part of the political game, was that as I got more popular and started being more of an asset to my husband, it was interesting that that's when people of all sides, and I stopped to say people from all sides, Democrats and Republicans, tried to take me out by the knees. I knew that I wouldn't get the benefit of the doubt. I wouldn't get the benefit of being treated as the gracious, honored First Lady.
Another grievance from the left, from a woman who was adored by the media, heralded all over popular culture, all over magazine covers, while one of the most impressive first ladies in history by almost any measure, Melania Trump, is all but ignored. Nevertheless, Michelle Obama sees herself as a victim. Quick break, and then we're back to talk about bias in the big media, what Brent Bozell says is like nothing we've seen in the history of the Republic.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Where can you find honest political commentary with sobering analysis, accountability, deconstructing threats to our liberty, and boldly reporting the truth? Subscribe to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel, where facts matter.
We believe that all men are entitled to the blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Well, media bias is hardly new, but in the era of Donald Trump, the likes of the New York Times, Washington Post, and every single major TV network, plus, of course, CNN, have elevated media bias to a true art form. And the man with the plan to unmask them, as he has for over 30 years of hoisting the media by their own petard, is a man who does it all. Lecturer, syndicated columnist, television commentator, debater, marketer, businessman, best-selling author, publisher, and activist. I'm losing my breath, but a man I just call a true friend. He's Brent Bozell, author of so many books I can't actually keep track, but his latest book assiduously documents a media bias against Trump so naked that it makes Nixon, Reagan, and Bush 43 look like they were beloved by the Fourth Estate. Hello, L. Brent Bozell III.
Timothy Donner, how are you?
I'm doing very well, my friend. So the book is Unmasked, Big Media's War Against Trump. So let me start by mimicking Johnny Carson when he used to say, you remember this? It's bad. And then Ed McMahon would say, how bad is it? Tell us just how bad and how unprecedented is the media's condemnation of all things Trump.
Well, let's start with how bad is it, and then let's ask why. How bad is it? There's never been anything like this in the history of the Republic. If you look at the coverage, and we analyze it every single month, and no one ever questions our data on this, since the start of the campaign in 2015, the coverage has been not just negative, but out of control negative. During the campaign, the coverage was overall 90%, and then beginning with January of 2017, they went on a roll where it is every single month, 91, 93, 92, 89, 91, 94% negative, except for his honeymoon month in January of 2017, where it was only, I think it was 86% negative.
Yes.
Right. And for the year, it rounded off at 90% negative. 9 out of 10 news stories were negative. So then the first question to ask is why? Why are they treating him unlike any president in the history of the Republic? And as best as I can come up with, and we discuss this in the book, I think there are three reasons for it. The first one is that he directly challenged the Obama legacy and said, if elected, he would basically undo the Obama legacy. And for that, they saw what Obama was offering as what they wanted, which was a fundamental transformation of society. And they saw that Hillary, in 4 to 8 years, was going to solidify it culturally and in fact change this country. So he tipped the whole apple cart. The second thing was they believed they created this monster. They made him a celebrity in Hollywood, and he got out of control, and they had to stop the monster. But the third one was the best one, which was, for the first time ever, someone declared war on them. Instead of defending themselves, he said, nope, right, I'm going after them before they come after me, right, and declared war on them. So put the three of them together, and you've got the perfect storm of hostility. They despise him. In the book, we go through the memo that he put out in October of 2018, listing the accomplishments of the administration. This is October of 2018, mind you. And these are accomplishments that you may not like them, but you cannot question them. As of October of last year, 3.9 million new jobs created. Hispanic unemployment at a record low. Black unemployment at a record low. Women employed at a record high. The most circuit court judges named in 1 year in history. 2 Supreme Court justices named. ISIS defeated militarily. My favorite. The list goes on and on. My favorite, because I had never heard of this one, 217,000 illegal immigrants with criminal records apprehended. Now, you look at that list of achievements, and what you've got by any measurement is an extraordinarily successful 2 years. It is the exact opposite of what they reported. This goes to show you the agenda they have there.
Now, Brent, you were not a Trump fan when he first ran, but unlike the Never Trump Republicans, you got on board when he secured the GOP nomination. Do you think this naked media bias will actually serve to unite Republicans, even those who aren't that fond of President Trump?
Tim, I think at the end of the day, one of two things are going to happen. One is that the media hostility against Trump is going to ultimately give a couple of points to the Democrats, and that could sway the election. On the other hand, the media's hostility to Trump could ultimately give Trump a couple of points that might sway the election to him. Either way, I think the media are going to decide this election. Now, if you put a gun to my head and said pick one, I would pick that it's going to help him.
That is Brent Bozell, and we carried on our conversation. We'll bring you the rest of it on next week's show as Mr. Bozell sounds the alarm about the escalating censorship of conservatives on social media. From how bad is media bias to how good is the economy when we return.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Where can you find honest political commentary with sobering analysis, accountability, deconstructing threats to our liberty, and boldly reporting the truth? Subscribe to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel, where facts matter.
We believe that all men are entitled to blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
As President Trump's approval numbers rise to their highest level since he assumed office, 47% in the latest Washington Post ABC News poll, The Trump economy appears to be firing on all cylinders. We're seeing simultaneous high growth, low unemployment, rising wages, negligible inflation, and soaring consumer and business confidence reflected in that rising tide sweeping from Main Street to Wall Street. Earlier in the show, we asked Brent Bozell the question, just how bad is media bias? And now we welcome in Liberty Nation's own economics correspondent, Andrew Moran. Welcome, Andrew, with a mirror image of the question I asked Brent Bozell. Andrew, just how good is this economy?
Well, when Trump ran for president, he said that the nation would be tired of winning, and I think Bill Maher summed up when he said that he's tired of winning, hates how Trump is doing so well. So I think when you look at the metrics, the main metrics, GDP, unemployment, job creation, they're doing exceptionally well. Now, I'm not a fan of GDP calculations, but it's impressive how much higher it is than during the 8 years of the Obama administration. But there's one thing that most people don't look at when it comes to jobs numbers, and that's when you compare full-time employment to part-time employment. Throughout the Obama's tenure, I always wrote that the United States was turning into a part-time jobs nation or a 1099 economy, even when the economy was expanding. But under Trump, it's been a complete flip. The part-time jobs, admittedly, there still are historic highs compared to 20 years ago, but they've been coming dramatically down under Trump. And then on the other end, full-time employment has been skyrocketing. So the Trumponomics is doing quite well. I mean, there's some things that I'm reserved about, but overall, it's been night and day compared to the last 8 years, or compared to the 8 years of President Obama.
Well, just to drill down a touch on something you said there about the Obama economy and how it was a part-time economy, wasn't it also, and we saw this in the push to raise the minimum wage to $15, wasn't the Obama economy also in many ways a minimum wage economy?
Yeah, that's true. A lot of jobs are service sector jobs. A lot of people worked in fast food. So that's another huge issue. But now when you have states who are raising minimum wage, people can't even get the minimum wage jobs because they're going extinct. If you look at New York City, they have a $15 minimum wage, and all those restaurant jobs are worse than what happened following the September 11th terrorist attacks. So people can't even get minimum wage jobs because the states are raising them. And then, of course, with wages now at $28, people are doing so well that they can get those $28 positions because of the corporate tax cuts.
Now, one number which may be most critical in the upcoming presidential election, since it benefits those states in the heartland that Trump stole from the Democrats in 2016, is the 500,000 manufacturing jobs created since Trump took office, after a loss of 200,000 manufacturing jobs under Barack Obama, who openly declared that those jobs aren't coming back. What's been the key to this resurgence in the manufacturing sector?
I think two things: the tax cuts and the deregulation push by the Trump administration under Obama, and of course previous administrations. The manufacturing sector, they were pummeled into submission by all the regulations, and then of course you had the higher tax rates, and then other countries had more favorable business settings than compared to what the United States had with manufacturing. Now, of course, manufacturing numbers, they're not as great as they were at the height of American manufacturing, where the middle class personification was based on everyone went to a facility, they had their steel buckets with their sandwich and milk, and they were operating heavy machinery. Those jobs, I mean, they really aren't coming back necessarily, but it's not because of Trump. It's because, or China even, it's because of automation. There's a lot of automations going on in manufacturing, and that's why U.S. manufacturing output is so high, because a lot of manufacturing companies, they're investing in technology and automation. And so the U.S. is still a huge powerhouse when it comes to manufacturing, but not just so much when it comes to jobs.
Our guest is Andrew Moran, LibertyNation.com economics correspondent, who's gaining increasing recognition across the Internet for his well-stated economic brilliance. Now, Andrew, the Federal Reserve raised rates last year. Wall Street slowed down for a time. Trump tried to shout down the Fed, and then the Fed took their foot off the gas. Who was right, the Fed or Trump?
Well, if you've been paying attention to my writing on LM, then you know I'm not a fan at all of the Federal Reserve. I don't think it is an independent institution as media keeps claiming.
Understood. Understood.
And I don't like the way Trump has changed his mind on the issue. I love Trump before his candidacy and when he was candidate because he was so blunt on the Federal Reserve. He complained about low interest rates. He denounced quantitative easing. He didn't like how the Fed was doing the bidding of Obama, whether it was under Ben Bernanke or Janet Yellen. But since, of course, coming to office, he's changed his mind, as if Trump was met by Mephistopheles and was promised astronomical economic growth if he suddenly reversed his position and said, I want low rates now. So if you're like me and a huge Fed critic, then you just want to grab some popcorn and watch Trump and Jerome Powell slug it out. I mean, I don't like low interest rates, but I enjoy the Federal Reserve getting what's coming to him. As if Trump is this boxer and he's coming in defeating this evil central banker and giving him black eyes left, right, and center. So I'm enjoying myself. It's entertaining.
Glad you're being entertained. I'm sure the president will be pleased to hear that.
But when it comes to the red tape, his plan, I think, was getting rid of 2 federal regulations for every new one. That was superb. Now, it would be great if he scrapped the regulations altogether, but it's better than expanding the regulation by the thousands. I mean, I think the last number I read when Obama's final year, he said, I think he added about 1,200 new regulations. I mean, that's
I believe, Andrew, that while Trump said he would commit to removing 2 regulations for every new one, I think the actual ratio has been more like 10 to 1. He's gotten rid of more like 10 regulations for every new one. Now, when Stephen Moore joined us here on the show a while back, and he's one of the architects of the tax reform bill of 2018. When he joined us on the show, and I've heard Larry Kudlow, Trump's chief economic advisor, also an architect of that tax reform bill, I've heard him say this too. He said the effects of last year's tax reform bill have been greater than they even imagined. Do you agree with them? And is it, as I surmise, the corporate side of tax reform that's made the big difference in this current spate of economic prosperity?
Yeah, I agree with both Mr. Moore and Mr. Kudlow. Corporate America has responded kindly to the tax reform bill. No matter how much big business gets slammed every election cycle, it's answered back and it's showed its gratitude. Corporations, they've raised their own minimum wages, they've increased their benefits, they've invested in workplace training. Even Wall Street has done all this. One great thing that should please the left is that they're offering parental leave and adoption support, which is a huge thing for the left, and something that even Trump and his daughter have talked an awful lot about, where they wanted to mandate parental leave, but businesses are doing voluntarily, so that's a great thing. It just shows that when you give businesses money back, it won't just hoard it, as many critics say.
Right.
It will reinvest the money into operations. Some will point, especially Democrats, they'll point to stock buyback. But there's a lot of misconception about this process. It's just a way of signaling that there really aren't any growth opportunities on the horizon, which can be both good news and bad news for the Trump economy, because on one hand, there may not be growth in business, but on the other, it might limit the damage of a recession because it preserves capital and it maintains the share prices, which are at record highs. One thing I do want to mention, though, about the tax reform bill, no matter how much we're praising it, there's one thing he didn't do over the GOP is that cut spending. It's great to cut taxes, but it needs to also be complemented with across-the-board spending cuts, which he and the GOP have not taken seriously. I mean, fiscal conservatism has been abandoned.
Now, when Stephen Moore joined us here on the show a while back, and he's one of the architects of the tax reform bill of 2018. When he joined us on the show, and I've heard Larry Kudlow, Trump's chief economic advisor, also an architect of that tax reform bill, I've heard him say this too. He said the effects of last year's tax reform bill have been greater than they even imagined. Do you agree with them? And is it, as I surmise, the corporate side of tax reform that's made the big difference in this current spate of economic prosperity?
Yeah, I agree with both Mr. Moore and Mr. Kudlow. Corporate America has responded kindly to the tax reform bill. No matter how much big business gets slammed every election cycle, it's answered back and it's showed its gratitude. Corporations, they've raised their own minimum wages, they've increased their benefits, they've invested in workplace training. Even Wall Street has done all this. The rest of the world, they're not really doing too well because they're embracing all this monetary easing and all this big government and tax hikes there and tax hikes there, no spending cuts. So the rest of the world, I mean, like Canada, it's a lost cause, but the United States, they're the beacon of prosperity, and it's doing very well under President Trump. It's probably going to do well in a few more years until probably a Democrat gets in power, and they're going to reverse everything that's been accomplished over the last 3-4 years. But for now, we should just have the good times roll, like the baby 37 jump in the streets wearing a diaper and drinking champagne. Let the good times roll.
Always finishing with a flourish, as he often does, is Andrew Moran. And I would say, Andrew, that it seems like the new normal, the new reality in recent decades in Europe, which they seem to have accepted, is chronic low growth and chronic high unemployment. Thanks for joining us, Andrew.
If I might say, that was a better ending than mine.
I appreciate that. Andrew Moran, economics correspondent for LibertyNation.com. Quick break, and then we're back talking liberty.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now we welcome you to the portion of Liberty Nation Radio, which we entitled Talkin' Liberty, which is self-explanatory, as we welcome in our regular contributor, constitutional lawyer, LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor, and a guy with many other credentials I don't have the time to go into, Scott Cosenza. Hello,
Thank you,
Scott.
Tim, for recognizing the other credentials, if not with specificity. I appreciate that.
It just leaves the intrigue with the listeners. So, Scott, there's been no moving target in the American justice system quite like marijuana. About 20 years ago, or longer than that, it wasn't legal anywhere. Now it has become decriminalized in more than half the country, with Hawaii becoming the 26th state to decriminalize it.
Since we last talked about it on this show, Tim, Illinois and Hawaii have both gone decriminalized. Now, both of those, this really is a fascinating study in federalism because all these laws are so vastly different. And that's why I really want to talk about these two laws. In Hawaii, they've only decriminalized 3 grams or less. Now, for people who don't have experience with marijuana or understand these issues, a gram of marijuana would be about as much as somebody might find in one joint, for instance, one marijuana cigarette. So not a whole lot of servings in terms of what a person can be caught with. So it is a legalization, but there are many people who will possess marijuana still in violation of the law. But that said, most of the police interaction with people with marijuana is about small quantities. It's about them smoking at a car before a concert or whatever, driving down the road. It's not about pounds of marijuana.
Right.
So while I think that the Hawaii law would be better if it allowed for more liberty, it's a great first step in stopping the police harassment of people with small amounts of marijuana.
Now, in Illinois, hundreds of thousands, now that pot's been legalized there, hundreds of thousands are eligible to have their previous marijuana criminal charges expunged.
Illinois was the first state, Tim, that did its marijuana legalization without the citizen initiative process. So you have to remember, we always have to point this out. These politicians have been dragged kicking and screaming into giving liberty to the people. These were done through initiative and referendum in other places. In Illinois, though, there was a legislative solution. And without having the law implemented and see how it works, we can't say for sure that they've done it right. But indications, Tim, it seems like they have done this right by right away within the law itself saying, not only are we going to go forward from this day without criminalizing this behavior, but we're going to recognize that we have criminalized it in the past, and those people should not be subject to those criminal penalties, whether it's they're in custody presently or on their record. And so I think it's a bold move for liberty in Illinois. Nevada and New York City have just issued laws where employers are not permitted to use marijuana positive testing as an automatic pre-employment rejection. Simple use of marijuana alone is no longer, it's no longer permissible to use that as a basis of employment discrimination in Nevada or New York City.
All right, let's move to another issue. The U.S. Appeals Court has ruled that President Trump violated the First Amendment by blocking Twitter followers and then Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is sued for the same thing. It's the only thing that Trump and AOC have in common, I think, Scott.
They ran to court. That was a New York legislator who ran to court immediately after this ruling came down. So Donald Trump was blocking people from his Twitter, as a president, of course, does, for people who who respond to his tweets in ways he doesn't like. He was sued. They said, you shouldn't be able to block our tweets because you're the president and we're Americans and we have a First Amendment right just like anybody else does to, I guess, retweet or comment on your tweet. And the lower court said that's true. Here we have the Second Circuit Court of Appeals ruling it's essentially a government public forum. If the president is doing this regularly with all these communications, he can't allow Americans to not be able to communicate with him through Twitter because of their viewpoint, because that then becomes impermissible viewpoint discrimination. So the decision is not limited, Tim, to Twitter, though. It's any kind of social media where there's that active engagement allowed. You can't have sort of a discriminatory, you're an American whose opinions I don't like, so you have a limited access to me.
Viewpoint discrimination.
Yes. Now, the complicating factor, of course, is Twitter is a private company.
Right.
So there are a lot of objections to this law. I mean, I think that I have a fairly good reputation as being a pretty stalwart First Amendment defender. I don't think that this is – I disagree with the court in this instance, and I expect we will see the administration appeal this to the Supreme Court, because I think that the ruling – this is new law. This is not like, well, we knew it was going to come down this way in terms of how they might perceive the case, so we'll just take our licks and go home. I would expect that since it's a new area of law, they may go ahead and pursue this to the Supreme Court. It wouldn't surprise me if they came back down the other way. And AOC got the same treatment as soon as the Second Circuit ruling came out. She was sued because she also blocks people who say things that she disapproves of.
Now, our state, the Commonwealth, the Old
Dominion, Tim.
The Old Dominion. Commonwealth of Virginia, wow, what a mess it's been here with all the revelations about not just the governor
who likes to dress up and apply makeup,
a governor and an attorney general who did blackface, brought the issue back to the fore. Who would have ever thought we'd be talking about it in
blackface
2019?
And busing, Tim.
And
busing, all that's old is
busing
new again.
In the presidential campaign. Yeah. And, of course, the lieutenant governor has been accused by two separate women of sexual assaults. But all that aside, a special session of the Virginia legislature took up the issue of aggressive gun control measures, but it flopped, didn't it?
Tim, Governor Northam constituted an emergency session of the legislature to revoke liberty from the people, to extinguish their rights to keep and bear arms as much as they could. And the Republicans, who have one vote in majority in the Senate and two in the House, or the opposite, were able to basically suspend all movement on this legislation. There were dozens of bills that were introduced, all manner of wishes and wants for the gun grabbers, from just outright bans to allowing every little burg in the state to have their own separate gun control laws, which then, of course, makes it impossible to travel throughout the state with a firearm, which is part of what their design is.
Not to mention very difficult to adjudicate. From one jurisdiction to another.
It's all efforts that are sort of thinly veiled as common sense or something like that, but they're designed in order to revoke and restrict the gun rights of the people. And I think it was a great move for liberty. That I think it was. I just want to strike that. So I think it was a very positive development for liberty, Tim, that the legislature decided to let Virginians hold their rights rather than snatch them from them.
I'm trying to understand whether there's been another instance in American history where a significant group of Americans sought to renounce one of their own rights.
Yeah, I can't think of it.
Is there another instance?
I've heard people discuss this before, because it's a common thing on gun control. It's the only right that I know of that people are, they're dying to get rid of it. Yeah, it's.
That puts it in perspective. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Tim.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcasts, The Uprising, hosted by Scott with occasional guest appearances from yours truly, and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose with Mark Angelides. All of it available on demand at LibertyNation.com and from fine podcast providers everywhere. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week. Same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying, stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.